Nobody saw coming the lethal turn that this odd partnership between an older and younger couple took. Tragic things happened when limits were crossed between boundaries and desire and trust. This is the terrifying tale of how an apparently innocuous exchange resulted in treachery, envy, and eventually, death. We explore the series of events in this true crime documentary that transformed an unusual connection into a lethal game with unchangeable repercussions. Please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and comment below if you enjoy reading about tangled relationships and unexpected conclusions. We can publish more compelling true crime stories thanks to your support. Two couples are the central characters in this tale. For more than 20 years, Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, who were both in their early 50s, had been mainstays in the neighborhood. They were the pair that the whole world admired. Prosperous, well-liked, and appeared to be content in their marriage. Their house was frequently the hub of activity in the area. Zara and Eric Donovan, newlyweds, had moved in just 3 homes down. In their mid-20s, Zara and they infused the area, which had long been inhabited by retirees and older families, with a youthful vitality. Their neighbors, especially the Hawthornes, were curious and welcoming of their arrival. Nobody could have predicted how these 4 people's lives would eventually become entwined in a web of obsession, desire, and murder. What started out as a risky sexual exploration experiment would turn into a nightmare that would leave one person dead and the other imprisoned. And 2 more struggling with the results of their decisions. This is the tale of how an apparently simple suggestion turned into a vicious crime that made national news and drastically altered the lives of those who were involved. It's a warning story about the perils that can be hiding beneath the surface of even the most seemingly normal people. And the terrible results of defying social conventions. The golden girl had always been Isabella Hawthorne. She was the prom queen, valedictorian, and captain of her high school cheer squad while she was growing up in Seattle. Isabella had more than a gorgeous face, though. She was incredibly ambitious and intelligent. It was during her sophomore year at the University of Washington that she first met Russell Hawthorne. Russell was the great quarterback, 2 years her senior, and he had a promising future. They were the ideal pair that everyone admired, and their courting was the stuff of college legends. Soon after Isabella graduated, they got married and set out to see the world as a couple. In his first year as a professional player, Russell suffered a knee injury that ended his potential football career. He changed his career path to sports management and advanced fast in the business. Isabella, on the other hand, went for a profession in marketing, where her ambition and inventiveness helped her become a rising star. Their daughter Lily was born around the time of their relocation. They gave their work and parenthood the same amount of energy. They appeared to have it all on the outside, a lovely home, a loving family, and prosperous careers. However, as the years passed, their flawless facade started to show signs of weakness. Because of his job, Russell had to spend more time away from home. As a result, he gained weight and lost the toned body that had initially drawn Isabella to him. Isabella, on the other hand, was growing more agitated. The house felt empty with Lily away at college, and her profession no longer brought her the same level of fulfillment. Isabella started to question if life consisted only of this. Seeking to replace the growing gap in her life, she enrolled in yoga courses and joined a reading club. She could not help but be envious of the young couples she saw, with their carefree laughter and passionate hugs. When had they last experienced such moments together, her and Russell? He carried on with his habit of working long hours at the office and spending nights with a beer in front of the TV, oblivious to his wife's dissatisfaction. Their chats became routine, centered around talking about expenses, house maintenance, and sporadic updates regarding Lily. With her 50th birthday coming up, Isabella began to get anxious. Would she live her entire life like this? Once voted most likely to succeed, the woman now felt she was ensnared in a golden cage of her own design. Isabella first saw Eric Donovan when she was in this frame of mind. Eric was young, attractive, and had a trim build similar to a swimmer. He was everything Isabella had been lacking from her life. Passion, excitement, and the prospect of adventure. Isabella experienced a stirring of desire for the first time in a long while. Observing Eric and his just-married Zara as they moved into the neighborhood, an idea that would change everything. Born Zara Khalil, Zara Donovan was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had moved to Portland 20 years before. She had always been torn between her upbringing in the liberal, free-spirited Pacific Northwest and her parents' conventional ideals. Zara stood out in a mostly white city because of her olive skin. From an early age, Zara displayed a love of the arts. Even yet, her parents were encouraging. Never undervalue the significance of having a practical career. In an attempt to find a middle ground, Zara attended Portland State University to study graphic design, which allowed her to combine her artistic inclinations with a useful profession. In Zara's last year at PSU, she got to know Eric Donovan. At a nearby coffee shop, where she was working on her thesis research, she struck up a conversation with the barista about her sketches. Zara was captivated by Eric's effortless charisma and boyish good looks right away. Eric was the youngest of 4 sons in a working-class family and had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon. 3 years prior, he had relocated to Portland due to the city's thriving arts scene and progressive culture. He was a barista to make ends meet, but photography was his real love. Had a small but devoted following on Instagram, thanks to his melancholic black and white photographs and harsh urban surroundings. They had a whirlwind romance. After just a few weeks of getting to know one another, Eric and Zara were bonded. They devoted their days to discovering Portland's best-kept secrets, underground art galleries, secluded gardens, and unassuming music venues. Zara taught Eric about the art of urban exploration, while Eric taught her about Lebanese food and culture. Eric was a symbol of self-expression and independence to Zara. He urged her to give her artistic endeavors her all. To escape her family's and society's expectations. Zara had never felt more seen and understood than she did with Eric. Zara was Eric's anchor and his muse. Her steady support and quiet strength gave him the courage to take his photography more seriously. He started to schedule minor gigs. Weddings, magazine spreads, even some promotional photos for local bands. Many people who knew them were surprised by their decision to marry. Though Eric and Zara were certain they had discovered their soulmates, both sets of parents voiced concern about the rapid pace of their relationship. In front of their closest friends and family, they held a short ceremony in a sculpture garden. The relocation was a wise choice. As independent contractors, they required a place that could double as a home and a studio. The peaceful area provided reasonably priced property and was near enough to the metropolis for employment prospects. They thought it would be the ideal location to begin their life together, spending cozy evenings discussing their future and leisurely Sunday mornings in their backyard. They had no idea that their new area was full of temptations and secrets that would put their nascent love to the test. Neither Eric nor Zara could have predicted the chaos that would follow or the disastrous effects of their decisions while they were unpacking boxes in their new house. The summer block party was an institution that had been going on for many years. Sycamore Lane would become a veritable fairground every year on the final Saturday in August. Potluck dishes would be piled high on folding tables, coolers brimming with beverages, and grills brought out by neighbors. While adults gossiped about local happenings and enjoyed chilled beers, children played with water pistols and bubble wands. The celebration was especially meaningful to the Sycamore Lane residents this year. It was the formal welcome for the newest residents of the street, the Donovans. As the neighborhood's unofficial social director, Isabella Hawthorne had made it her mission to make Zara and Eric feel at home. Isabella approached the Donovans, who were standing clumsily at the edge of the group, while the afternoon sun illuminated the street in a golden glow. "Isabella, you appear stunning." As she passed the sundress that was dangling around her legs, Russell yelled. She gave him a quick smile, but her attention was already on Eric. "Greetings from the neighborhood, Eric and Zara." Warmly speaking, Isabella let her hand linger on Eric's arm for a little too long while Eric kissed Zara's cheeks. "We are so happy you could come." The dialogue proceeded smoothly. Encouraged by Isabella's tasty sangria, Zara got sucked into a conversation about nearby art galleries with a few of the other neighbors while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. Eric said, glancing around the place, "You have a beautiful home." Isabella grinned proudly. "Why," she answered, "thank you. See the inside, please. Our master bath renovation just finished. Maybe I could take you on a tour at some point. Obtain you some inspiration for your own home?" Isabella's voice had a definite undertone of flirtation. Eric felt a flush crawl up his neck, little taken aback but not angry. Eric's shoulder was touched by Russell before he could reply. "Son, I hope my wife isn't hogging the phone." Russell laughed. Isabella gave him a look that was equal parts adoration and irritation. Eric pointed out that she was merely willing to show him your renovation. He sounded a little stressed. The two couples saw that as the evening went on, they were drawn to one another. For the first time since moving in, Zara found herself unwinding as she was drawn to Russell's dad jokes and sincere interest in her artwork. Isabella, on the other hand, hung on every word Eric spoke about his photographic endeavors. By the time the celebration concluded, seeds had been sown. A growing source of allure, inquisitiveness, and temptation that none of them could have predicted. A week had passed since the block party when Isabella had initially brought up the topic with Russell. They were dozing off. With a playful twinkle in her eye, Isabella turned to face her husband while the TV continued to play in the background. One night while they were lying in bed, Isabella brought up the topic with Russell. Though her tone was informal, there was a hint of eagerness in her question when she questioned if he had ever thought about making their relationship more exciting. At first, Russell murmured incoherently, half sleepy. Isabella persisted, emphasizing that she meant the bedroom in particular. Russell was instantly aware of this and became attentive. Russell cautiously inquired as to the specifics of her idea. After taking a long breath, Isabella proposed that they try switching partners with another pair. When she made her proposition, there was an overwhelming hush. Russell fixed his gaze on his spouse, attempting to ascertain her sincerity. His face showed a range of emotions when he realized she was surprise, curiosity, and a tinge of excitement. Throughout the following few days, Isabella's proposal was a topic of much discussion among the Hawthorns. Although skeptical at first, Russell eventually warmed up to the concept. Something that he believed had long ago died was sparked by the idea of being with a younger woman. Isabella was the one who ultimately proposed the Donovans. They're new to the region, handsome, and young, she thought to herself. They may be amenable to something along these lines. It turned out that approaching the younger couple was a tricky subject. Isabella took Zara aside at a neighborhood barbecue, having had a few glasses of wine to give her confidence. Zara was taken aback by Zara's response after the proposal was presented, which made the conversation awkward initially as Isabella skirted the topic. The younger woman's gaze betrayed interest rather than indignation or disgust. There was a mixture of excitement and nervousness on the evening of the trade. The Hawthorns had proposed to use their house, pointing out that their finished basement would provide an ideal, quiet location. Zara felt her heart thumping in her chest as she and Eric strolled up the driveway hand in hand. Is this truly what we're doing? He gave her a comforting grip on the hand, but she could also see the fear in his eyes. At the door, Isabella greeted them with an overly bright smile and an overly loud laugh. They were drinking expensive red wine and striking up small talk, but there was a contrived casualness about the whole affair. In an effort to diffuse the tension, Russell busied himself with the stereo, playing soothing jazz music throughout the space. Following an interminable unpleasant exchange of words. At last, Isabella got to her feet. "Shall we then?" she said, her voice almost audible above a whisper. They had decided on the pairings in advance. Russell with Zara, Isabella with Eric. Zara couldn't help but look back at Eric as they parted ways, a pause of doubt lingering between them. However, Zara found herself by herself with Russell as Eric vanished down the corridor with Isabella. Russell patted the small of Zara's back as he guided her to the guest bedroom. Even with his former confidence, he experienced a surge of anxiety. He hadn't been with anyone besides Isabella for years. Sensing his uncertainty, Zara started things up. She extended her arm to give him a gentle, then a more intense, kiss. In response, Russell's hands confidently began to explore her youthful, solid figure. Isabella was enacting the fantasy she had been holding since she first saw Eric in the master bedroom. Even with his lack of expertise, his youthful enthusiasm and energy more than made up for it. In a manner she hadn't felt in years, Isabella felt wanted, attractive, and alive. Eric, on the other hand, was seduced by Isabella's assurance and seductiveness. Each participant experienced a range of emotions as the interactions reached their peak. Excitement blended into a bewildering concoction. Later, when they were all gathered again in the living room, an uneasy quiet descended upon the gathering. All of a sudden, the truth of what they had done appeared to sink in. Zara was too busy smoothing out imaginary wrinkles from her clothing to look Eric in the eyes. Russell cleared his throat multiple times, but he was at a loss for words. Only Isabella appeared to be really comfortable. Eric was the one who ended the stillness, a content smile teasing the edges of her lips. He spoke in an attempt at a casual tone, but it didn't work out. That was noteworthy. The room erupted into uneasy laughing as the tension released. For several more minutes, they engaged in stilted small chat until the Donovans finally made their excuses and departed. Eric and Zara strolled home in silence, engrossed in their own reverie. They had no idea how drastically their relationships had changed in the last moment. Resuming the Hawthorn residence. As she cleaned up, Isabella hummed to herself, already planning for the next time. As Russell observed her, a persistent sense of uneasiness intensified in the depths of his abdomen. They had no idea that this night was only the beginning, the first move on a road that would eventually lead to sorrow, obsession, and treachery. Days after the exchange, everything appeared to be back to normal. However, changes were building beneath the surface, especially with Eric Donovan. Eric couldn't help but think about Isabella all the time. He had never felt such hunger before, but the event had aroused something in him. When he realized Isabella would be leaving for work, he started making up reasons to be outside. He would wave, attempting to look nonchalant. However, his gaze would remain fixed on her even after she had left. Zara was quick to realize that her husband had changed. Eric appeared preoccupied and frequently lost in contemplation. He was too weary or not feeling it when she tried to make love to him. Their once fervent courtship became sporadic and robotic. Zara returned home early from a client meeting one afternoon to discover Eric's photography studio in chaos. She noticed something strange as she started to clean up. A folder full of Isabella's pictures was tucked under a pile of prints. A few were obviously photographed from a distance, showing Isabella strolling to her car, retrieving her mail, or gardening. Some were closer to one another. Isabella in different degrees of undress, zoomed in photos via windows. Zara felt a knot in her stomach. This was more than just a casual crush or the fallout from their meeting. This was something altogether darker. Isabella, meanwhile, had started to realize that Eric was spending more time with her on a daily basis. She first took pleasure in the attention and even returned it with seductive looks and unintentional touches when they crossed paths. But as the days passed, Eric grew increasingly furious and erratic in his behavior. He started messaging her at all hours, switching between fervent vows of love and irate charges in response to her tardiness. Eric was not amenable to Isabella's gentle reassurance that their experience was a one-time occurrence. Isabella was awakened one night by the sound of something striking her bedroom window. She was alarmed to see Eric in her front yard, holding a handful of rocks. His wild, unfocused gaze came to rest on hers. His voice broke as he screamed out, "Isabella, I can't live without you. It was meant to be, us and you." With a hurried closing of the curtains, Isabella felt her heart pound. Russell moaned as he went to speak with Eric after she woke him up. Russell went outdoors, but Eric had vanished into the night, leaving nothing on the front step but a rumpled bouquet of flowers. That night, as she lay awake, Isabella became increasingly horrified to see that something dark and evil had been let loose by her thrilling sexual adventure. She was unaware of how accurate her assessment was and how devastating the outcome would be. Isabella became increasingly irrational in her behavior throughout the course of the following few weeks. Everything in his life was devoured by his obsession with Isabella. He put off running his photography business, spending hours driving past Isabella's house and watching her social media accounts. Zara was unable to stop her husband from changing into a person she hardly recognized. For her part, Isabella wavered between a deranged exhilaration and horror. A part of her was afraid that Eric was becoming unstable. However, there was another part that delighted in his fixation, a portion she was embarrassed to acknowledge even existed. She had not felt attractive or strong like that in years. One afternoon, when Isabella got home, she saw Eric lounging in her living room, which escalated the issue. "How did you enter this place?" Her hand sprang up to her throat as she gasped. Eric grinned. A chilly, unnerving look that gave Isabella the chills. "Remember that key you handed me? For providing the plants with water while you were away." Isabella's brain whirled. That was prior to the switch, several months ago. Prior to everything going awry. She ought to have requested its return. Why hadn't she requested its return? Eric stood and approached her with a graceful, predatory gait. "Isabella, I need to talk to you." His voice was deep and low as he spoke. "About us. Regarding our shared future." With a backward motion, Isabella reached for her phone. She tried to maintain her composure and continued, "There is no us, Eric. You must go now." But Eric continued to move forward, his eyes wild with a mix of craziness and love. He argued, "You don't mean that. You experience what I do. Isabella, we were meant to be together. Nobody is going to be able to stop us." Isabella screamed as Eric lunged for her. Eric seemed to awaken from his reverie at the sound. With a blink, he surveyed the room as though observing it for the first time. He swept past Isabella and out the front door without saying another word. Isabella fell back onto the couch, trembling. Though she should have called the police, she wasn't sure what to say. That he was now pursuing her even though she had voluntarily had sex with her young neighbor. It was intolerable to consider the controversy and the knowledge of her actions by all. Isabella had no idea that the implications of her quiet would be disastrous. Because, in his deranged mind, Eric believed that her inability to report him was a symptom of her love affair, and he was resolved to remove any barriers that stood in their path at any cost. On a calm Sunday afternoon, the tension that had been building for weeks finally broke out. Russell had gone to play golf with some friends, leaving Isabella alone at her home. As she heard the rear door open, she was carelessly leafing through a magazine in the kitchen. Isabella cried out, her voice quivering, "Is that Eric?" There was no reply. With her heart beating and only the sound of footsteps passing through the house, Isabella reached for a kitchen knife and held it out in front of her like a shield. Eric smelled of booze and emerged at the doorway, his eyes blurry and unfocused. Declaring that they could now be together as they were meant to be, he mumbled that he had watched Russell drive away. Isabella begged Eric, telling him that this wasn't right and that he needed help, but she was unable to complete her statement. Eric was not paying attention. He made a sudden move, attempting to seize Isabella. She cried out in terror and slashed the knife frantically, cutting Eric's arm and drawing blood. Eric seemed to become even more enraged at the sight of his blood. With a howl of abuse, he charged at her once more. The knife clanked to the ground in the subsequent battle. Isabella's throat was found by Eric's hands. Isabella grabbed at his face, gasping for air as her vision darkened around the edges, and squeezed with horrifying strength. She raised her knee sharply in desperation, catching Eric in the groin. He felt the hit, doubling over in agony and loosening his hold on her throat. With her fingers wrapping around the handle of the dropped knife, Isabella scurried off. Eric's angry face twisted as he stood up straight. Isabella did as she was driven to do. Feeling the knife dig into Eric's chest, she pushed it forward. It felt as though time had stopped for a moment. Eric cast a downward glance at the knife sticking out of his torso. His expression changed from one of rage to one of amazement. Subsequently, he stumbled to the ground. As Isabella gazed at Eric's still form, the realization of her actions overwhelmed her. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling. The community's silence was broken by the sound of sirens as an ambulance and police cars approached the Hawthorne home. Surprisingly, neighbors spilled out onto their front lawns to see the paramedics race into the house. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to discover a devastated Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by cops, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Her eyes were wild with shock and horror, and her hands and clothes were covered with blood. He heard bits and pieces of Isabella's remarks as Reeves drew near. She was expressing astonishment and disbelief at what she had done, claiming that Eric had attacked her and that she had no other option. Having taken command of the situation, Reeves ordered a comprehensive search of the house and its surroundings. As crime scene investigators searched the kitchen and took pictures of the bloody knife and evidence of fighting, Reeves focused on the neighbors. With a look of shock and astonishment on her face, Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape. Gently approaching her, Reeves identified himself as Detective Reeves and affirmed that her spouse was the victim. Zara silently nodded, her eyes welling with sorrow. Zara choked out that it had been that morning when Reeves grilled her on when she had last seen Eric. She began to explain that Eric had mentioned he was taking a walk, but as she tried to take it all in, her voice died off. She was unable to go on and started crying. Reeves took a note in his pad and went on to interrogate the other neighbors. As he learned more details, a narrative of a peaceful neighborhood shaken by an unbelievable crime started to take shape. While Eric Donovan's body lay covered in a sheet on a gurney, Reeves couldn't get rid of the sensation that this wasn't just a case of a straightforward home invasion gone bad. He could see by the expression of shame and relief in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes that discovering the truth would be a difficult and nuanced process. Detective Reeves delved deeply into the lives of the Donovans and the Hawthornes in the days that followed Eric's death. In contrast to the early reports of a random break-in, what he discovered was a complex network of lies and secrets. Conversations with nearby residents uncovered rumors of an extramarital relationship between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records from the weeks before the tragedy revealed an alarming amount of calls and messages that Eric had sent to Isabella. Many of them had received no response. However, the revelation of Eric's photo studio completely unraveled the case. Investigators discovered a camera with a powerful zoom lens and memory cards full of hundreds of images of Isabella, many taken without her consent, hidden among his professional gear. Zara lost her mind at seeing this proof. She opened up to her husband about the partner exchange and the ensuing obsession that had engulfed him, even though she was crying. She talked about her personal concerns over Eric's mental health as well as his unpredictable conduct and disregard for their marriage. As the evidence grew, Isabella eventually admitted the whole truth. While acknowledging the affair and stalking, she insisted that the last altercation had been a self-defense tactic. Despite being saddened by his wife's adultery, Russell supported her over the whole affair. Reeves was overcome by the horror of it all as he pieced together the events leading up to that fateful Sunday afternoon. What started off as an idiotic attempt to liven up a boring marriage turned into an obsession that killed the young man. It irrevocably altered everyone's lives. Previously believed to be a simple case of house invasion, the case turned out to be a convoluted story of infatuation, betrayal, and death. Isabella was portrayed by the prosecution as a bored housewife who started an affair with a younger man and killed him to cover up her transgressions. They highlighted how deliberate her acts were, highlighting her husband's convenient absence on the day of the murder. Leading the defense team was well-known lawyer Simone Jeffries, who vehemently contended that Isabella was being stalked and harassed and had acted in self-defense. In addition to calling experts to testify on the psychological effects of stalking on victims, they showed proof of Eric's compulsive behavior. Zara's testimony turned out to be crucial to the outcome of the case. Numerous jurors were swayed by her moving description of Eric's spiral into obsession as well as her personal anxiety for Isabella's safety. Zara sobbed and stated, "She's not the monster they're making her out to be." By the end, Eric was not the same person. It was a tragic event. But Isabella was a victim just like everyone else. The prosecution pleaded with the jury not to be influenced by feelings during his closing remarks. He argued that the facts were evident. This unfortunate result was the result of a series of decisions made by Mrs. Hawthorne. We have to make her answer for it. In her response, Simone Jeffries tapped into the jury's empathy. She begged you to put yourself in Isabella's position. She was terrified, by herself, and facing a man who had been pursuing her for several weeks. She acted as any other person would. She struggled to survive. The courtroom was abuzz with rumors when the jury was called in to start deliberations. Now, it was up to them to decide Isabella Hawthorne's fate and render a verdict on this suburban tragedy. Isabella Hawthorne received a 5-year prison sentence with a 3-year parole option. Everyone there could feel the weight of the tragedy as Isabella was released from the courtroom. Russell Hawthorne watched his wife leave the courtroom, his face gaunt from the strain of the trial. He had supported her through the entire struggle, even in the face of the allegations of her infidelity. He now had to consider spending years by himself as they dealt with the fallout from their disastrous experiment. Widowed and alone, Sarah Donovan withdrew from society. Deep scars were left by the tragedy of losing Eric and the revelation of their intimate lives to the public. She gave her everything to her artwork, creating a number of eerie paintings that were later praised for their potent examination of betrayal and grief. The people in the village found it difficult to accept what had happened to destroy their quiet neighborhood. The abandoned houses of Hawthorne and Donovan served as continual reminders of the catastrophe that had occurred. Some neighbors, unable to handle the memories, moved away. For those who stayed, their mutual trust was permanently changed.